there are a lot of little things that in the black community, the Gullah Geechee community, we've seen people look like they've been trying to give to us to say, well, okay, because y'all have made some noise about the fact that you're not included in a lot of the story or the tours or the history of the particular cities, we're going to place this marker here, we're going to place this monument here.
The tourism is, of course, the gravy train that feeds everybody, and so that there's ongoing discussion about what it is people want to see.
People come here because they want to know the story. They want to know the history.
A lot of people are attracted by the beautiful city, the architecture, the moss on the trees, all the things that you associate with an old city like this. But there are plenty of people who come here who want to learn the truth. They want to understand why it looks like this, who built this, who did most of the work, what was it like in 1850 in Savannah.
It's not just that, you know, just that that researcher, that college student, that person looking at writing a book. That's the mom and pop. That's the grandparents. It's the uncles, the aunts. It's the kids coming wanting to know.
I also want to welcome you to the hostess city of the South and to the fourth busiest shipping port in the country.
Walking Savannah's streets, visitors are awash in history. But if history is written by the victors, then what stories are lost, marginalized, or silenced?
Tourism in Savannah is a jealous business. And so with that jealousy, we see with God to even be able to tell the story. People feel threatened.
The more that people say they're trying to remember us, seems to be the more they've forgotten about us. And that in and of itself is a spiritual conflict within a lot of people who are saying that they feel that they are being fair in the retellings or the tellings or their interpretations of what history has even been along this coast.
And when we start talking about the stories here that are not told, and then that does a disservice to all of us, people not understand the fullness of the story.
The part that people don't see is the financial transaction, because even to get one historical marker in the state of Georgia, South Carolina, along this coast is around $5,000 plus to get something to be placed there. And then you have to deal with whose rights to the land do you have, because now you're encroaching, as they would say, to put the marker there. So you have to have the permissions and you have to go through another process. So that then has left out a lot of the African story, a lot of the Gullah Geechee story, because the people don't know how the process goes, or when they get to the cost factor in the process and realize, no, historic preservation boards don't just pay for this, no, historic groups don't just pay for it, the state won't just pay for it, or the city, then you have to then get into these drives, and you have to have the drive to keep such a movement going. And so that then becomes, who tells the story and how does the story get told? And a lot of times it's all about the money behind it.
Out of dozens of trolley, bus, carriage, and walking tours of the city, only 3 discuss the role of slavery and the enslaved in building and developing Savannah. Out of more than 40 public monuments, only 1 directly addresses slavery.
Well, there's a monument on River Street in Savannah that's supposed to represent the black family or the African American family. And there was a lot of controversy about it. Now, I know the person who stood as the model for the man who is on the statue. But then when I looked at the bottom, I said, well, is this something that I don't know? Because why is Maya Angelou's poem used on here? She's not from Georgia. She's not from the Gullah Geechee Nation. She's not from Savannah.
The thing about the statue is that it doesn't have a name. It's not enclosed, you know, so people stand on it, chip away at it, you know, and I don't know if there was ever a plan to, you know, encase it. But you're right about the clothing. People would come up and, you know, say, really? I said, well, it's breaking the bonds at the bottom of the feet, but I understand there was a collective gasp when they unveiled it, and there were these Africans in modern dress, because that didn't quite make sense.
So once again, it's like, so then is this a monument to the people of Savannah that suffered and was sold right here on River Street, or is this just something in general that in time, we don't actually know who those people are, because of the material it's made out of. Those don't have to be African Americans. They could just be anybody's family. So what is it that makes us know that's a monument to us?
We don't want to get into those discussions in Savannah about Africans being sold there on Hudson Island, that them being housed over there, stationed over there, or on River Street, they're being sold right off the boats. This is after the ban on the importation of Africans. This is after 1808. In Savannah, they did it 1819, 1821, something 1830, doing it on River Street in Savannah. Discussions that are there, but we tend to ignore it.
The eternal conversation is that we have in a public history institution, anytime we do a program about slavery, what we always run into is a problem with attendance, because white people see it as black history and they don't want to be made to feel bad. They're going to come and hear somebody talk about slavery. A lot of African Americans just might not want to hear about it either. They feel like that's the only part of their history that's ever really focused upon, and so we often have a problem getting anybody to turn out for a program like that.
So often folks go and say this is black history or Native American history or this is women's history. No, I'm telling folks this is all part of what we know as American history. American history is knowing the story about everyone.
You will hear me talk for hours and you never hear me say the term African American, especially about history, because this is American history and it's what happened to the Africans when they got here. That's the story I'm telling. And that's when people relax, because there's nothing worse than, it's nothing personal.
But there's this controversy. Why are you trying to make me feel bad if I'm white or if I'm black? You know, we did other things besides pick cotton, right? There's jazz, there's art, there's music, there's commerce, there's industry, there's all of these things. So it is a struggle. But a city like Savannah was built upon, in the 19th century, the enslavement and the enslaved labor of other people. The house that we're sitting in right now dates from the 1850s, and I venture to say that a lot of the craftsmanship in this house was done by enslaved people. I think we can recognize that and talk about it without making anyone feel bad. Again, it's a part of our shared past.
Some argue that tourists wouldn't want or might even reject a more inclusive account of the city's past.
There's some tension as to what people think tourists want to see when they come here, what they should see. If it was just one giant dose of white people bad, black people good, there's this feeling that tourists would stop coming here.
It's really an irony to a lot of people that come here that as much as they make money from the fact that those cities were built on selling people, they have now made those people again a commodity to be sold on a tourism market without the people being seen, unless you see a picture in a museum. And that's a whole nother market in and of itself.
So there's this ongoing tension between a place like the Georgia Historical Society that might want to, for instance, mark the site of a slave sale or a slave auction house or a slave merchant, and people in, let's say, the city who feel like, well, we've told that story, or that's going to make tourists uncomfortable when they come here. Nobody wants to hear that. They want to come here and feel good when they come and spend their money. Do they really? I don't know. I mean, I think there's a combination of both.
I think most coming outside of the region absolutely love this because it is authentic, it is the real story, and that's what they want to hear. We really have very little pushback as long as we do it in an authentic way.
You have the physical landmarks that are here. You have the landmarks that are here. And that can easily be discussed, but we refuse to discuss it. We don't want to share it because we think that's going to hurt business. When I tell folks, no, in fact, it'll bring you more business.
Believe it or not, there are people who want to hear that story because they want to hear the truth and they want to understand it so that they don't repeat it. The one who does not know history is destined to repeat it.
Savannah's relationship with the coastal Gullah and Geechee community offers one example of how some cultures remain in the background of the city's official histories. The Gullah and Geechee community is formed of the descendants of enslaved Africans who created their own communities along the Georgia and South Carolina coast.
When we start talking about the Gullah Geechee Nation, which Savannah, Georgia is part of, there are Gullah and Geechee people, but we are one people. The only reason that those two terminologies exist is because initially Angolans were kidnapped from the motherland, from Africa, which was Alkebulan. And when they would be sold at auction blocks like River Street, for instance, in Savannah, they would say, well, we have a cargo of Gullah for sale. And that was a corruption of Angola. Then there were also the Gola people, Gola, from the Windward Coast, Rice Coast region. So many of the Golden Isles were areas where Carolina gold rice was grown. There were also people from the Windward Coast, Rice Coast, who were Gidzi, G-I-D-Z-I. So when you get to terminologies Gullah and Geechee, those are really the origin points. So the African people who the Krakati like Adesha Rangya and thing like that, they are the Gullah Geechee people. We don't mean the people who grew up along the Ogeechee River.
Just south of Savannah is the Gullah Geechee community of Pinpoint. Pinpoint was settled in 1896 by former slaves from nearby islands. The community is now part of the Moon River District, which is a collection of 6 visitor sites and the historic waterfront village. However, the area is off the beaten path for most tourists.
Pinpoint community, there's a rich history of a people who were just up out of slavery, who had the intestinal fortitude to survive. They were agriculturalists on the Berry Islands, and once they had to leave these islands and came to the mainland, they were still fortified with the strength to be self-sufficient.
You got this tension between the Chamber of Commerce that wants people to feel good about their experience in Savannah without maybe understanding what that would be. You can talk about all of these things, Sapelo, Pinpoint, slavery, Jim Crow, in a way that educates without depressing on some level.
People think of Savannah, outsiders and insiders. It's a historic district. It's buildings. It's architecture. You walk around, you look up, you walk inside some beautiful homes. They're decorated extravagantly for the elite. But what about outside Savannah? Isn't there anything?
How do we draw people out of Savannah to go to Ossabaw, a place that's remote, not easy to get to, but well worth the time?
And we want people to realize, come out to Pinpoint, but it's part of a larger whole. Make this a normal process. It's not you're just doing a black thing. You're doing the whole texture and contours of a whole society, a world.
I'm not sure exactly how to draw people out of the downtown, but I think that one way is to continue to emphasize the interconnectedness between a city and its surrounding countryside, where there's so many great stories that illuminate. The food Paula Dean makes has its origins somewhere else, probably, besides downtown.
If our culture is the driver behind millions and millions of dollars of it, then how come none of those millions of dollars are then driven right back into the hands and the pockets of the people who already suffered, who already had their families ripped apart, who are still suffering in a lot of the poorest housing in the country, that have some of the poorest schools and education system that's failing in the country? Why isn't that money then being funneled back in order to really restore and make whole these families in these communities?
A key question has to do with whose right or obligation it is to shape and share the stories of Savannah's past. Who has the moral authority to speak for those whose voices have been marginalized?
Georgia Historical Society has learned that if we're going to talk about slavery in the Low Country or whatever, we need to get buy-in and get other people to help us tell that story. We go to Vonette, Good Walker. We go to Jamal Toure. We go to people who, the Gullah Geechee themselves, because there is a sort of ownership. There's an idea that whatever our educational and research mission is, we're traditionally a white institution. What could we possibly know about this story?
That is one of the things we've had to fight for in terms of people misinterpreting and reinterpreting Gullah Geechee culture, because they were non-Gullah Geechees who were now entertaining people and calling it Gullah Geechee, being storytellers and singers and saying this is all Gullah Geechee culture is. No one culture is all of the entertainment aspect of a culture, and it's not about you caricaturing a culture.
It's up to the people also to tell their story. It's important to listen to them. And I share with folks this. I say, the people are the expert on who they are. I'm not going to say that it's relegated just to one, that you have to be African American to know our story. No, it's anyone who's diligent out there getting the information and wanting to share it. That's beautiful.
So really morally, what we need to accept is that each person from a different vantage point has another side of that story to actually tell, because your positioning in the story is going to be different than mine. What your ancestors did is different than what my ancestors did at that time frame. So we have to tell it all if we're going to actually tell the truth.
If you open it up, it's going to be fulfilling to everyone. You'll find even more people coming here, because a lot of people do come here wanting to know about history.
It is about letting the people who still are there, who are descendants of that culture, speak and let their voices come forth for themselves. And that is the best way for us to negotiate any platform about how you present the story.
In reality, there is a sense of what right do you have to tell the story of lynching or to understand it. So there's a lot of really difficult waters to be negotiated there. Whose story is it? Who gets to tell it? Who should be included? Who's excluded? And what happens if any of these people are included or excluded? Does it muddy the waters? What can a black person possibly tell us about slavery? They're biased. We hear that too. What can you know about lynching? You're white. You were on the side of the lynchers 100 years ago. There's all of these difficult things that have to be untangled.
Why don't you collaborate with the people who are of African descent and let them tell their part of the story, and then you tell a part of the story that pertains to your people, and let it all be at all spaces, at all places. Let it not be compartmentalized into a kiosk, into a photograph, into something we press a button on and listen to inside of a museum, or on your one little day that you say, oh, this is for the Gullah Geechee people today, once a year, or it's Black History Month, it's February, let us all have a panel discussion about it. Why don't we each and every single day share the wealth that's being generated from the telling of these stories and share the truth of these stories? And why don't we then work together to make sure the world knows the whole story?
My point would be none of that can stop us from trying to uncover the past and explain it in a way that will help us understand the present. It's really hard. It's really difficult. But that shouldn't stop us from trying to do it and asking for people's help when we need it. And we do need it.
I want folks to be and feel empowered. I want folks, that grandmother, that grandfather, to understand that they are empowered because they have something of value to give to other people. And now when I say displacement of the story, that they are keys with regards to no longer letting them be displaced, that they are truly a part of the connection. And I think that that's something that's lost by a lot of people, not embracing the elders that are here.
But what people don't realize is the marker is just that. It just marks a point in history. It marks a location. And now it's up to you to tell the rest of the story from that point. There's more. It's just a vantage point. It's just an entry point into the story. That is not a book. And so it's not an encyclopedia of whatever we're marking. So now you're going to have all these voices that need to speak.
There's some people who think, well, haven't you marked everything? Right? I mean, history's done, right? I mean, you've done that. They don't really understand how history works. Uncovering the past is an ongoing process. We ask new questions as new evidence comes to light. Each generation just looks at everything differently in the past. We're okay now sort of poking at Confederate heroes and asking, were they really heroes? What was the story with the Confederacy? What was it all about? Rather than just accepting received wisdom.
The question remains, how does Savannah expand its history to include marginalized voices and recover the untold stories of its past?
If we collaborate, guess what? All of us even get a fuller story. And that, again, we network and act, and guess what? We become a center, we become the pinnacle with regard to history and how it should be treated, how it should be done in the U.S.
That is the only way that you are going to say that you truly are in a multicultural America, is when you get to the point that everybody then knows that African people were more than people who you call slaves, that these were people of intellect, they were of culture, they were people of science, they were healers, they're architects. They did a multiplicity of things other than entertain you or shake your babies or pick your cotton. There's so much more to our story and who we are, what we have lived and what we are living. And until we're ready to tell all of that, then we have not changed much. We have just changed clothing maybe and presented these things in a new way, but we are not progressing. We're not moving forward.
The same happens here, but I think there's a balance that people are trying to achieve, and I think there's some people in Savannah who have worked very hard to achieve that balance, to be a bit more truthful and inclusive about everybody in the past and the role they played, enslaved and free, while at the same time doing it in a way that educates and on some level probably still entertains people and meets their expectations.
There's an African proverb that says, as long as the name of a man or woman is called, that man or woman never dies. So people often wonder why I am an advocate for knowing the names of who the people are that you're talking about. Who are these people of African descent on your museum walls in photographs? Their families probably still alive. They would like to walk in and see their family members' names there and speak those names out loud to the next generation of children of their families. And so when is it that we are going to begin to speak the names, even Gullah and Geechee? When are we going to speak the names of the numerous families that were part of the weeping time and were sold in this big auction, this one massive auction in Georgia? When are we going to call out those names? When do we have that roll call of truth and have people, whether you have to cry, then cry?
Everybody got their hands dirty in slavery, even people who didn't own slaves. And so we're still dealing with that. We deal with it in monuments, we deal with it in markers, we deal with it in public discussions, we deal with it in the editorial pages of our newspaper every single day. And it's a process. It's not anything that's going to end at a certain time.
Because ultimately, again, I'm optimistic also that what's going to happen, that the day will come when that story is going to be told fully, and everyone will get the real taste of what it was like to be here and what it is to be a Savannah, a part of our history in this area, in the low country of South Carolina and Georgia.
It's not enough to give a token monument here and there and then cut the people off and just sever them from who they really are, and especially take away the voice. Because when you make a statue, it doesn't speak. If you put a picture just hanging on the wall, it doesn't speak. So you still need the people who can speak the names. But how do you do it if you never heard them? If I'm a child in school and I'm never taught about these individuals in the first place at all, how can you say there's a memory of them? There is no memory, because I never knew them and I never heard about them. So if we're going to talk about places of memory and retaining these as historic sacred places, we have to call the names, because again, whenever the name of a man or woman is spoken, that person never dies.